In late May of 1940, inside the Reich Air Ministry in Berlin, Hermann Göring tossed aside an intelligence report with an expression of open ridicule. The report summarized President Franklin Roosevelt's call for an enormous expansion of America's aircraft production capacity, an ambition to manufacture 50,000 military planes every year. To Göring, this was little more than American bluster. He assured his staff that such claims were nothing but propaganda, scoffing at the notion that the United States could simply convert its automobile factories into facilities capable of building modern warplanes. Aircraft production, he insisted, required specialized skills Germany believed the Americans lacked. But while Göring dismissed the idea, a quiet revolution was already unfolding in the American Midwest. In Detroit, a Danish-born industrialist named William Knudsen, once the president of General Motors, had accepted Roosevelt's request to lead America's defense production effort for a symbolic salary of $1 per year. Knudsen was orchestrating a transformation unlike anything the world had ever seen. Within 4 years, American factories would not merely achieve the impossible figure Göring mocked. They would double it, producing nearly 100,000 aircraft in a single year, while simultaneously supplying 2 different global battlefronts. It was Roosevelt's speech on May 16, 1940, delivered as German armor sliced through France, that launched this astonishing mobilization. Standing before Congress, he openly declared that the United States must build at least 50,000 airplanes annually. Even within Allied governments, many considered the goal fantastic. In 1939, the United States had produced barely 3,600 military aircraft. Its Air Corps possessed fewer than 2,000 combat-ready planes, many of which were outdated. Roosevelt was demanding an industrial expansion on a scale that had no precedent in modern history. Knudsen became the architect of that transformation. When Roosevelt's advisors were asked who could possibly turn such a dream into reality, the reply was simple. First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen. He brought with him the rigorous mass production methods perfected in the automotive world and applied them to aviation, an industry that had never before embraced assembly line efficiency. Under his guidance, the American industrial machine began to awaken. By the end of 1941, the country was building 2,000 military aircraft every month, a 20-fold increase over the output of only 2 years earlier. Major expansions took shape everywhere. Ford began constructing a massive new bomber plant at Willow Run in Michigan. Boeing enlarged its factory complex in Seattle. Douglas Aircraft hired thousands of men and women to meet rapidly growing demand. The United States was beginning to turn into the arsenal of democracy Roosevelt would later describe, an industrial power whose factories became as strategic as its armies. What Germany failed to comprehend was that American weaknesses they perceived were largely illusions shaped by their own ideology. Nazi leadership, including Hitler himself, dismissed reports from their own military attachés in Washington, who repeatedly warned that the United States possessed far greater industrial depth than German leaders believed. Hitler rejected these assessments outright, instead voicing racist theories about American society that blinded him to the country's true potential. He claimed that a nation he viewed as racially mixed lacked the discipline to sustain a major war effort. Those prejudices prevented him from understanding that democratic mobilization, voluntary cooperation on a national scale, could far surpass the productivity of authoritarian command systems. Meanwhile, American plants were expanding into giants. Willow Run, constructed on open farmland in 1941, eventually became the largest factory under one roof anywhere in the world. It stretched more than a mile in length and housed a workforce unprecedented in size. Early production was chaotic, quality control was abysmal, and many of the first aircraft required complete reassembly. Ford struggled with the complexity of building the B-24 bomber, a machine with nearly 500,000 parts. But through relentless innovation, breaking the bomber into thousands of sub-assemblies, designing new hydraulic tools, reorganizing the workflow, and improving worker training, Ford transformed chaotic beginnings into staggering success. By late 1943, Willow Run was producing over 300 bombers per month. In 1944, it reached its peak. One finished B-24 every 63 minutes, 24 hours a day. A single American factory was outperforming the entire German aviation industry. German pilots were among the first to recognize what Göring had refused to see. During the fighting in North Africa, Luftwaffe commanders noted the increasing number and improving quality of American aircraft. Replacement planes arrived faster than the Germans could destroy them. By early 1944, the mathematical imbalance had become overwhelming. During the Allied Big Week strategic bombing campaign, America deployed thousands of bombers while Germany lost hundreds of irreplaceable fighter pilots. American factories were producing more fighters in a single month than Germany could produce in several. And the disparity wasn't only quantitative. American aircraft came equipped with advanced navigation systems, powered turrets, complex bomb-sighting technology, and reliable engines. Many German fighters, by contrast, flew with limited ammunition, missing radio equipment, and components made from inferior materials due to shortages. By 1944, the United States had become the greatest aviation production nation in history, building more military aircraft in 1 year than Germany produced in the entire war. Numbers that Göring once mocked now represented the instrument of Germany's defeat.
While America's factories surged to life, German intelligence continued to misinterpret what they were seeing. The presence of women in aircraft production plants, for example, was dismissed in German reports as an act of desperation. Luftwaffe analysts assumed American industry was scraping the bottom of its labor barrel, and that quality would inevitably plummet. Their worldview, rigid, ideological, and anchored in stereotypes, could not accommodate the idea that a democracy might outperform a dictatorship in the very sphere the Nazis considered their strength, industrial efficiency. The reality was quite different. By 1943, women made up the majority of workers in many aircraft factories. More than 300,000 women found themselves working in aviation production alone. Their presence didn't weaken output, it improved it. At Douglas Aircraft, female inspectors reduced defect rates dramatically. At Willow Run, Rosie the Riveter and thousands like her mastered heavy tools and precision tasks, some driving thousands of rivets per shift with near-perfect accuracy. American companies even redesigned equipment to be more ergonomic, a change that unintentionally made production faster and safer for everyone, men and women alike. While the United States embraced innovation and inclusivity, Germany retreated deeper into chaos. Bomber attacks forced the Nazi leadership to disperse aircraft production into hundreds of underground or hidden facilities. Göring approved the vast Jaeger program, which attempted to scatter aviation manufacturing across nearly 800 makeshift locations. Many were staffed by forced laborers living and working in horrific conditions. Predictably, sabotage became common, quality plummeted, and the logistical chaos of moving parts between scattered factories created endless delays. Meanwhile, a single Ford plant in Chicago was producing more reliable engines than some entire German program clusters combined. As Germany struggled, the US pushed aviation technology to new heights. Boeing spearheaded the design of the B-29 Superfortress, the most advanced bomber of its time. Pressurized, long-ranged, and packed with technology unavailable to Germany even in prototype form. 4 major factories coordinated its assembly using modular construction, creating parts so precisely standardized that components from one plant could fit seamlessly into airframes produced at another. By early 1945, America was building 100 B-29s every month, a feat that bordered on science fiction from the German point of view. This industrial might reached its decisive moment on June 6, 1944, D-Day. On that day alone, the Allies deployed nearly 12,000 aircraft in support of the invasion of Normandy. Germany managed barely a few hundred sorties in response. The sky over France became a clear demonstration of the outcome of the production war. Behind the massive invasion force lay months of preparatory bombing. In just 5 months of early 1944, Allied aircraft dropped more tonnage on German targets than Germany had dropped on Britain throughout the entire Battle of Britain. Transport aircraft delivered airborne divisions with a scale of logistics Germany could not dream of matching. Later, in 1944, single Allied raids sometimes consisted of over 100-200 bombers, escorted by nearly 1,000 fighters. The P-51 Mustang, now plentiful and long-ranged, could accompany bomber formations from England deep into Central Europe. German fighter pilots referred to these escorts as the Indians because they seemed to appear everywhere, swarming in numbers no Luftwaffe group could challenge. As 1944 progressed, the industrial disparity reached almost surreal extremes. American factories produced more than 96,000 aircraft in that year alone, more than Germany managed across the entirety of the war. The numerical imbalance was reinforced by qualitative advantages: better equipment, longer range, superior radios, advanced firepower, and more reliable engines. Even Germany's technological marvel, the Me-262 jet fighter, arrived too late and in too small numbers to alter the outcome. Barely more than 1,000 were built, and only a fraction were ever operational at any given time. Shortages of critical materials forced engineers to use substandard components, while the jet engines themselves required constant overhaul. The United States, by contrast, had already begun its own jet fighter programs years earlier and fielded the P-80 Shooting Star before the war ended, an aircraft that outperformed German jets in many respects. America had the capacity to pursue experimental technology while still producing conventional aircraft in overwhelming numbers. Germany was forced to choose between innovation and production volume. America simply did both. In the final months of the war, even the most entrenched Nazi officials were forced to acknowledge what Göring had refused to accept in 1940. Joseph Goebbels wrote privately that Göring's promises of air superiority had been delusions. Field Marshal Rommel warned his staff that the Americans could lose 10 tanks for each German tank and still advance. Hitler himself eventually admitted to his generals that German intelligence had underestimated U.S. industrial capacity from the beginning, and that the mistake had been fatal. By the time Germany collapsed, American air superiority was absolute. In late 1944, a single U.S. raid might involve more aircraft than Germany produced in an entire year. By early 1945, Germany's remaining pilots faced skies so filled with Allied fighters and bombers that many missions were abandoned before they could even approach their targets. The truth was undeniable. The war was being decided as much on factory floors as on the front lines. When Germany finally capitulated in May 1945, Hermann Göring, the man who once laughed at Roosevelt's aircraft plan, was taken into custody by American troops from the U.S. 36th Infantry Division. At first, Göring attempted to maintain his usual display of arrogance. He insisted that German technology had been superior and claimed that the Luftwaffe had been defeated only by the overwhelming numbers produced by the Allies. But as interrogation deepened, the once boastful Reichsmarschall began to confront a reality he had spent years denying. Göring was transferred to Camp Ashkan in Luxembourg, a special facility established to hold and question high-ranking Nazi officials. There, U.S. intelligence officers conducted detailed interviews focusing on Germany's strategic failures, including the catastrophic underestimation of American industrial capability. Major Kenneth Heckler, one of the interrogators, recorded several candid admissions from Göring that revealed the extent of his shock. Göring confessed that while he had always assumed America possessed a strong industrial base, he had never imagined the United States capable of scaling production so rapidly or so efficiently. What astonished him most was Willow Run, the Ford plant he once ridiculed, whose output alone surpassed the entire German bomber force at its peak. Incomprehensible, he told Heckler. He struggled to grasp how one factory could exceed what his own air force had achieved using the full power of the Reich. What troubled him even more was the logistical ability displayed by the United States. He openly acknowledged that Germany struggled to sustain operations a few hundred miles beyond its borders, while America supplied and equipped armies thousands of miles from home. The United States fought on two major fronts across two vast oceans, all while increasing domestic production year after year. This level of coordination, Göring admitted, was beyond anything the Third Reich could ever have matched. At the Nuremberg trials, prosecutors confronted Göring with charts, graphs, and reports detailing the vast discrepancies in aircraft production. U.S. monthly output in 1944 exceeded Germany's annual totals. Film reels showcasing American assembly lines, endless moving belts carrying completed bombers, were shown in court. Witnesses testified about the integrated production networks, the rapid adjustments to combat needs, and the technological advantages that emerged from American research laboratories. One particular statistic reportedly left Göring momentarily speechless. The United States had produced more than 812,000 aircraft engines during the war, compared to Germany's approximately 241,000. Prison psychologist Gustav Gilbert observed that Göring became preoccupied with production numbers, repeatedly recalculating ratios and comparing American factories to German totals. He referred to Willow Run as that cursed factory that broke our backs. During questioning, he admitted that the Luftwaffe's defeat was not the result of pilot performance or aircraft design alone. It was a mathematical certainty, he said, an industrial avalanche that Germany lacked the power to resist. Every time Germany managed to assemble a new fighter group, American factories produced several more. Every experienced German pilot lost in combat was replaced by a novice, while the U.S. replaced aircraft, pilots, and equipment at a rate Germany couldn't fathom. As Göring sat in his cell during the trial, he began to articulate a realization that had eluded him throughout the war. Germany had built its strategy on ideology, while America built its strategy on capability. Germany relied on coercion, racial myth, and forced labor, believing these would produce results. America relied on free labor, unprecedented cooperation, scientific advancement, and a national commitment to production. The difference proved decisive. In March 1946, during testimony at Nuremberg, Göring publicly acknowledged what he had privately accepted in his interrogations. He had never truly believed the United States could multiply aircraft production 100-fold in only 4 years. That pace of expansion, he claimed, had seemed physically impossible. Yet the evidence lay plainly before him. Factory by factory, statistic by statistic, America had demonstrated that free societies, when mobilized, could surpass totalitarian regimes not only in quantity but in ingenuity. The democratic system Göring dismissed as weak had achieved what he believed unattainable. His mockery had turned into Germany's undoing. In the months that followed, while awaiting execution, Göring's reflections grew more somber. Gilbert recorded that the former Luftwaffe chief felt haunted by the industrial scale of the American war effort. He saw in it a systematic strength that the Nazi leadership had never respected. Göring's final comments revealed not just a personal defeat, but the demise of an ideology that believed fear and force were superior to cooperation and innovation. As the war drew to its close, the consequences of Germany's failure to understand American industrial strength became undeniable. Entire cities lay in ruins. The Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self, and the Reich's elaborate hopes of technological salvation had crumbled. No amount of ideology, bravado, or last-minute miracle weapons could compensate for the simple truth that the Allies, particularly the United States, possessed overwhelming material superiority. Even within the Nazi leadership, clarity finally began to replace delusion. Joseph Goebbels recorded in his diary that Göring's earlier boasts about Luftwaffe dominance now seemed like criminal fantasies. Rommel warned that American forces could absorb catastrophic losses and still continue to advance, because their factories would simply replace everything destroyed. Hitler himself eventually admitted to his generals that they had ignored accurate intelligence reports about the United States' enormous industrial potential. That misjudgment, he conceded, had been fatal from the beginning. When the war ended, Göring was left with nothing but time. Time to reflect on a conflict he had once believed Germany would win through sheer force of will. In the interrogation rooms and later at Nuremberg, he faced evidence of a reality he long denied. Charts, production logs, and comparative statistics showed America's industrial output dwarfing Germany's by staggering margins. The images of Willow Run's endless assembly lines and America's ubiquitous supply convoys stood in stark contrast to Germany's improvised underground factories and fractured logistics. For a man who once prided himself on mastery of aerial warfare, this was a crushing realization. Psychologists who observed Göring in prison saw a man increasingly fixated on numbers. He repeatedly recalculated aircraft production figures, comparing single American plants to the entire Luftwaffe infrastructure. One statistic haunted him more than any other. The United States had produced more aircraft in 1944 alone than Germany managed over the entire 6 years of war. He eventually referred to Willow Run as the factory that broke our spine, a concise summary of how industrial capacity, not battlefield tactics, sealed Germany's fate. In the final hours before his scheduled execution on October 15, 1946, Göring wrote a letter that revealed an unusual moment of honesty. He acknowledged that the Third Reich had not been defeated primarily by superior military leadership or battlefield heroism, but by a rival system capable of mobilizing people and resources on a scale he never thought possible. "We were overcome by factories," he wrote, an admission that the true power of the United States lay not in rhetoric or ideology, but in organization, innovation, and unity. He recognized at last that the defining struggle of the war had been a contest between two fundamentally different systems. Germany relied on coercion, hierarchy, and forced labor, believing these methods would produce efficiency. America relied on voluntary cooperation and the collective energy of a free people. In the end, freedom proved far more productive than fear. The workers who built the aircraft that filled Allied skies were not driven by oppression, but by choice, patriotism, and opportunity. Göring's final statement to prison psychologist Gustave Gilbert reflected this understanding. "We declared war on an industrial giant while it slept," he said. "Once awake, we were doomed. They did not merely build more than us, they reinvented the act of production itself." These words, spoken by the former head of the Luftwaffe, stand as an unintentional tribute to the industrial and democratic systems he once mocked. In the decades since the war, historians have repeatedly affirmed this central truth. The Allies won not simply through bravery or strategy, but through the relentless force of material production. Richard Overy, one of the foremost scholars of air power and industrial warfare, summarized it succinctly. Victory came not from tactical brilliance, but from the weight of material. The evidence is overwhelming. By 1944, the United States was producing more aircraft than all other nations on Earth combined. Germany was not just beaten, it was outproduced on a level that left no room for recovery. Yet the legacy of America's wartime industrial miracle extends beyond military victory. It demonstrated the extraordinary capacity of a free society to mobilize for a righteous cause. It revealed that diversity, cooperation, and democratic energy could achieve feats that dictatorships could neither imagine nor replicate. It laid the foundation for a post-war era of unprecedented prosperity, innovation, and technological advancement. Every bomber assembled, every engine built, every rivet driven spoke to a larger truth. In times of crisis, democracies can become the greatest engines of strength the world has ever known. The story of America's production miracle is thus not only the story of how a war was won, but also a reminder that the power of a nation lies not merely in its weapons, but in its people. Hermann Göring laughed in 1940 at the idea that the United States could produce 50,000 aircraft a year. He died knowing that America had produced nearly 300,000, a figure that transformed not only the war, but the history of the modern world. The story of America's wartime industrial transformation did not end in 1945. Its impact continued to shape the world long after the final shots were fired. The sheer scale of what the United States achieved between 1940 and 1945 remains almost unimaginable even today. Factories built for war laid the groundwork for peacetime prosperity. Techniques refined for bomber production later powered the rise of modern electronics, automobiles, aerospace engineering, and eventually the space age itself. The workers who stepped into plants at the beginning of the war, many of them inexperienced, uncertain, or entirely new to industrial work, left behind a legacy that stretched across generations. They built not only the aircraft that overwhelmed Axis air forces, but also the foundations of America's economic and technological dominance in the second half of the 20th century. The transformation of ordinary citizens into a highly skilled industrial force was one of the war's quiet miracles. The production miracle carried another lesson as well, one that reached far beyond economics or strategy. It proved that the strength of a nation does not lie solely in its armies or its weapons, but in the character of its people. The United States did not win because it coerced millions of laborers into miserable underground factories or because it placed blind faith in ideology. It won because free individuals chose to work together in pursuit of a shared purpose. In this sense, every aircraft rolling off an assembly line served as a statement about the power of democracy. Each B-24 built at Willow Run, each P-51 Mustang emerging from North American aviation, each bomber assembled by teams of women who had never before touched industrial tools. These were not just machines of war. They were symbols of what a free society could accomplish when driven by determination rather than fear. Germany's leadership never understood this. Göring, Hitler, and their circle believed that authoritarian control automatically produced superiority. They assumed that a rigid hierarchy was more efficient than democratic cooperation, and that ideology could substitute for mathematical reality. These beliefs blinded them to the fact that America's decentralized, diverse, and adaptive society possessed latent strengths no dictatorship could match. When Göring mocked Roosevelt's goal of building 50,000 aircraft a year, he wasn't merely miscalculating production numbers, he was misjudging an entire system of governance. He believed that democratic nations were soft, that cooperation was weakness, and that industrial power sprang from command, not creativity. The war proved otherwise. Innovation, flexibility, and the collective will of millions proved far stronger than coercion. By war's end, the numbers spoke for themselves. The United States had produced nearly 300,000 aircraft, more than triple Germany's total. American factories built 812,000 aircraft engines, while Germany produced barely a third of that number. And beyond the numbers lay the infrastructure, the technology, the organization, and the human capital that propelled the United States into the post-war era as a global superpower. The arsenal of democracy did more than defeat tyranny. It reshaped the destiny of nations. In the decades that followed, the principles that guided wartime production, innovation, inclusivity, and responsiveness became pillars of American economic life. Engineers who cut their teeth designing wartime assembly lines later crafted the rockets that sent astronauts to the moon. Women who had entered the workforce to build airplanes inspired future generations and helped broaden the roles available to American women. Scientists who worked on radar and navigation systems went on to make foundational contributions to computing, electronics, and aerospace. What began in 1940 as a frantic national mobilization became, in the end, the blueprint for a modern, technologically driven America. And at the center of this transformation is the lesson that Göring never understood. The strength of a democracy cannot be measured by peacetime appearances. A nation that values freedom, creativity, and diversity might appear chaotic or unprepared. But when such a nation is threatened, and when its people choose to stand together, it can summon a level of power no dictatorship can rival. Hermann Göring laughed in 1940 because he believed democracy was incapable of great feats. The years that followed turned that laughter into the symbol of one of history's greatest miscalculations. The man who once ridiculed American industry died, knowing that a single U.S. factory had outproduced his entire Air Force. His contempt became the epitaph of the regime he served. The arsenal of democracy did not simply defeat the Third Reich. It revealed the enduring truth that the energy of a free people, once awakened, can accomplish the impossible.